Good day, y'all. Welcome to episode 22 of the AREN podcast. What's up, guys? Before we do anything, like, comment, subscribe, hit something on this because I'm out here spreading good vibes. And if the internet has taught us anything, is we need more people spreading good vibes. So do it for me. Do it for the people. Here we are. Let's go. So I got a couple things coming through this podcast. Talk about teaching hot yoga and what it's like to have sweat dripping off your nose while you're in the middle of teaching a class. I was just a guest on another podcast called the Introspective podcast. And so I could do a little debrief on that. Check that one out. Planning yoga retreats out west, talking about why people are allowing corporations to sort of do what they do, and we're forgiving them because they're connecting with our political views in the moment. And then I talk about learning online, talk about learning to code, learning about project management, and why we need to get plastics out of our lives because it's really bad for our reproductive health. Here we go. What's up, guys? Good to see you. Doing a podcast. You might notice the lighting's a little bit different, and that's because I didn't do my podcast this afternoon, and I just got back from teaching a yoga class, and I said to myself, Aaron, you're going to do a podcast. And my wife made lovely sushi bowls, and mine is luckily sushi bowls are meant to be eaten cold, so it's just waiting for me on the countertop, and I think she's probably going to watch a half hour of Gilmore Girls because my wife is obsessed with Gilmore Girls, so if you hear that, that's what's popping. Also, my chihuahua is pretty fired up today. I don't know why. Chihuahuas are like the tides. They come in and out. Sometimes they're super chill and relaxed and lovely and sweet little dogs. Other times they're absolute terrors. And so he's in his terror mode today. So if you hear my dog barking, that's what it is. But usually I record these in the afternoon where it's like me in the house by myself and everything's nice and mellow and the dogs are like waking up from naps, so they're a bit groggy. But it's an active household. It's like 8 o'clock, crushing a pod, doing it for the people, doing it for me, doing it for the people. Just taught a yoga class, and it got hot in there, man. The hot yoga space, it's like the rooms are heating up now that the weather's heating up, and the heaters don't have to compensate for how cold it is, because now that it's springtime, it's, I was dripping. I forgot how much sweat you make in a hot yoga class, and I was teaching, and it's one thing to be practicing and realize, like, God, I'm sweating a lot, but to be teaching is a whole nother thing, because like I'm sweating and I'm moving, but I have to cue. So I'm cueing and teaching and doing the whole yoga teacher thing. And I noticed that I'm like, sort of like, as I speak, sweat's coming off my lip, and I'm like, it's a global pandemic. I need to get this like sweat spit thing under control before someone freaks out and reports us to the governor. So, but it was fun, man. It was nice to get back into the yoga space today and like really feel some heat and get after it. It's, my wife is really helpful when it comes to, because she comes to my classes pretty regularly. It's really helpful to like know like where I'm repeating myself. And so she said to me, I talked to her after class. I was like, "How was class today, babe?" She's like, "It was good." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, what do you mean by that?" And so she told me, like, I've just been repeating a lot of the same things. I've been doing a lot of the same sequences and similar movements and similar patterns and similar teachings, like from the yoga philosophy. And what that signifies to me, one, it's really nice to have someone who's paying attention and regularly attends my class. Even though like I have regulars, it's more about like the time that is regular for them than it is about like making sure that they come to every one of my classes. So, but my wife is, she comes to my classes and she picks these things up and she gives me this feedback. And every time she says it, it stings a little bit, just a little bit. It stings. I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm the yoga teacher. Like, that's like what comes up in me when she gives me this like really thoughtful, mindful feedback. But then if I really like take a moment and pause, she's right. She's 100% right. I've been teaching very similar sequences. And what that means is I'm not practicing with other people. I'm just doing my own yoga, and my yoga has been informed by a lot of teachers, and I've sort of like solidified what my teaching practice is. But what's interesting about my style of teaching is it's very creative and open and flowy and big and expressive, and that comes from integration of different styles. And if I'm not practicing with other teachers, and, watching other teachers online and kind of dialing into what other people are up to, then I don't really have anything to integrate. I don't have any, it's like trying to be a writer without reading books, Stephen King in his book on writing, which is just a really good book and useful advice if you have any intention of any creative pursuit. But more than that, it's just a memoir of his early writing years. And he says if a writer's not willing to dedicate a lot of time to reading, they're not going to have the tools to be able to be a good writer. And so it's sort of like that with yoga. I'm not dedicating myself to taking practice with other people. I'm just sort of practicing by myself and practicing as I teach. And so I'm just not, I'm not exposing myself to enough tools. So it was good. It's good to remember that, good to notice that. And let's see if I do it. I'm a busy guy. I used to say that I'm busy all the time, and I realized that it was when you ask people like, hey, how you doing? Like, I'm busy, but doing great. It's sort of like a humble brag. Remember that? Humble brag, hashtag humble brag. I went through Twitter and on Instagram for a while. The idea of complaining about something that you should be like, that demonstrates how awesome you are. And I think that the idea that when you respond to someone and you say I'm busy, it's sort of synonymous with saying I'm important. I don't think that that's a nice way to phrase. I think that's what people mean, and that's just not the right way to do it. So yeah, I'm busy, but you're busy too. We're all busy because we're all important. Oh, first 5 minutes, we're all important. All beautiful souls living under this beautiful sun. I'm grateful to be back doing podcasts more regularly. I'm on a mission to bank these things, man, because I really value the consistency in being able to have something to share. A friend of mine asked me, like, why are you making a podcast? And we were sitting at my kitchen table. I had some people over, and we were sitting at my kitchen table, and I just had this realization. I like to build things. I just like to build things. I don't really have much of an expectation. I like the table that we were sitting at, I built, I don't really know how to build furniture, but I built this table. I built my van. I'm building this podcast. I built a website. Like, I just like building things, whatever it is, and in different mediums. Cause I think it's what humans are supposed to do. We're just supposed to build stuff. The thing that delineates us from other species in a big way is the use of tools and our complex language and consciousness to obviously, but the things that we do is we create complex language and we create tools. I like both. I love hip hop music. I love hip hop music because it's an expression of language in an extremely creative way. And I love to build things, regardless of what it is, digital, physical, mental, whatever, man. I'm into it. What did I write down? I wrote down some stuff. Oh, I was on a podcast. I was on, what's real funny? I listened to this podcast today back that I was on, and I realized that I was way better on his podcast than I am on my podcast. My podcast is way more like just rambling, stream of thought, working through stuff, sharing things that I've learned. And on his podcast, it was so much more concise and to the point. But I think that was a style of podcast that he said, but in the pre-interview, he's like, I'm going to try to boil that a couple pieces down to put out for my social media content. I'd like to have, if you'd be willing to share any tips or tricks, how the yoga world applies to entrepreneurship. I was like, yeah, I can totally do that. But I don't do that for my podcast. My podcast is way more free thought, just like open, and it's just tangential. It's like the way my brain works. It's an opportunity for me to learn. It's also an opportunity for me to share what I've learned and to also demonstrate to people like in my sphere and people that are out in the world that don't know me, that are listening to the podcast, which is crazy that people are listening to the podcast that don't know me. It's interesting to just like be able to make something and show people that you can just make something. You don't need permission to just go do whatever you want to. I had a friend who started a podcast for a while. It was a sports-based podcast, and he stopped doing it, but it was great. I listened to it, and he was really naturally good at it. And it was interesting to see a friend who, like, I would have never thought like he would be a podcaster, but he just started doing it. And it was awesome. It was cool to see people build stuff. I'm so totally into that. So I was on this podcast. It's called the Introspective podcast. And it's a business-based podcast, but it's based upon like He talks about a fair amount about mental health and, different business strategies and stuff. But I was on to discuss how yoga and the tools of yoga can help to, it can, create peace, ease, comfort, and mindfulness for business people specifically is what he was looking for. But I sort of hijacked a little bit and brought it into a bit more of like how we should be communicating with our partners, coworkers, employees, family, friends, all that, and how we should be using the tools of yoga to do that. So check that podcast out. I think it's a really succinct, working with someone else is always really interesting. I think it just brought up for me, having listened to it today, that I should have people in on the podcast, because maybe 5 podcasts back, I interviewed a friend of mine who ran 100 miles, and it was so interesting to just have someone else to sort of bounce with and be in conversation with, because it helps to focus things a bit more when you have the expectation of someone understanding what you're saying and hearing what someone's saying and letting that sort of bounce off for you to come up with other questions and thoughts and so forth. But I also think that, there's a real utility in sort of talking to yourself in a public setting, because it's a different muscle. It's a wholly different muscle to just go and to just keep going and to allow yourself to just authentically display, like, what am I thinking? How am I thinking about things? What's going on? I think it's a hugely valuable muscle, because then it teaches us how to relate with ourselves and to demonstrate for people that it's okay to share what you're thinking. I've found myself a couple times like, should I talk about this on the podcast? Because like I think in the early podcast, like the first couple, when COVID was really like kicking off, like I was sharing thoughts and opinions and philosophies, and I was getting a bit more in the moment of what was happening in the world. And I think over the last like 5 or 6, I've been coming out of that. And I think it might be coming from a place of fear of saying the wrong things about different political things. And I don't think that that's healthy. And I think that it's probably more important to take the risk to share my thoughts in order to demonstrate that it's okay to not be on a party line. Do you know what I mean? So, what, am I going to do that right now? I have been thinking, so I'll share something with you. I have been thinking about how a lot of people have gotten behind corporations and started to support them in a different capacity than they were 5 years ago, because those corporations are showing an effort towards inclusion and equity, which of course they should be doing, and they should have been doing it a decade ago. But, these companies like Nike and Facebook and Apple, all these different companies, it seems like we're not talking enough about how they, like Nike and Apple, have exploited like semi-slave labor in Asian countries for decades. And I mean, if you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, like I have an Apple computer, I have an iPad right here, and I have an iPhone right here. So am I being hypocritical? Yeah, I am sort of being hypocritical, but I don't think it's necessarily the consumer's responsibility to always be checking up on the people that are making their stuff. For example, like I just watched this podcast the other day about how plastics are a highly unregulated industry, and they've led to this woman discovered and researched in the early 2000s that phthalates, which are part of plastics, petroleum-based plastics, which are all plastics effectively, phthalates have helped to create major birth defects in kids, ones that you wouldn't notice like from seeing a baby, but if you pay attention and then you track those kids throughout their lifespan, it affects their their reproductive capabilities. And so like it's not my responsibility to like make sure that companies aren't making stuff that's going to poison children through the generations. And apparently these birth defects can linger through 3 generations if they hold sway. And so when I think about like how people are like, Colin Kaepernick, the quarterback in the NFL, ask me what team he's on. I don't know, because I don't follow sports. Cardinals? Is that an NFL team? Oh my God. See last podcast when I was talking about hanging out with a bunch of bros. This is the sort of thing I would catch myself in. Like, he plays football for who? And I played football. I love football. I loved playing it. I know the sport intimately because I played linebacker, so you really have to know the sport. Linebackers are kind of like the quarterback of the defense. So you need to know offense and defense. And so I learned the game really well. And I played it as like B plus. I wasn't a great player, but I did my job and I did well at it and I enjoyed it. But I don't keep track of it now. But back to my original point, Colin Kaepernick, during when the national consciousness was starting to actually pay attention to police brutality in communities of color and impoverished communities in the cities, he, as you know, I'm sure you know, this isn't a news podcast, this is years ago, he took a knee during the Star Spangled Banner, and that became like a huge controversy. And wherever you land on that, like, of course he has a right to protest in whatever capacity he does, but also a free a non-governmental private corporation has they have a choice in who they do and don't want on their roster. So that, like, nobody's doing anything illegal. But the point I'm trying to make is that then Nike really gave this guy a megaphone, and he deserved a megaphone because he was talking about a really serious topic. And then as all that was happening, and I'm thinking about it over the last like 3 or 4 months, I'm thinking, but isn't this the same company that was like exploiting labor in Asian countries? Like, did we forget about that? Did we forget that, like, as soon as this company shows their woke card, that they weren't devastating and like showing terrible worker practices in Asia? And then sort of same thing with Apple. It's like, Apple's doing a lot of good stuff now with privacy, which I really like, on the Apple platform. They're also, publicly showing that they're being more inclusive and more inclusive in their hiring practices, which is like 100% the case, like should be happening. I actually just read an article in The Economist because I'm a smart boy. I just read an article in The Economist that apparently people with darker skin than white people, they in like not pulse oximeters. What is that? It sounds like someone goes in a car. Pulse oximeter. The things that you put on your tip of your finger when you go to the doctor that tests your oxygen saturation, whatever the heck that's called. They were reported as having higher blood oxygen than they actually did because the scanner was never like intended for black and brown skin. And it's like, that's a clear oversight that if you just had like one person of color in your engineering team, they would have been like, they would have probably tested it and realized that it's not working, or they would have been like, hey, this isn't only for white people. And so apparently during early stages of the pandemic, a lot of people were sent home. I'm uncrossing my legs. Hopefully I don't blow up my knees. See last podcast on discussion of me waiting to blow out my knees. They sent a bunch of people home because they thought their oxygen level was higher than it was. And, Xbox, Microsoft owned company, when they first came out with the Xbox Connect, I think that's what it's called. I don't know. Again, I don't play video games. I don't do these things. It's like a camera that reads your body in space and your face in space, and then it moves an avatar on the screen based upon what your body's doing, and it just didn't recognize black faces or black or brown faces. So like, if you just had a couple people on the team of people of color, then they would have picked that up, So there's all these different gaps in this conversation, but like, are we going to forget that Apple had in Foxconn in the early aughts? Is that what people say? I don't know, 2000 to 2015. It might still be happening. I don't know, but I remember reading a report about it shortly after college when I was working in the business world, and they had at Foxconn, they put up nets because people were hurling themselves off the building, and because their job was so crappy. So we just gonna forget this stuff because they're playing this. They're only doing this because they want us to buy their stuff and to not think that they're evil. Remember, Google used to be, their slogan used to be, "Don't be evil." What happened to that? Because it feels real evil now. And then Facebook too. Like, Google Facebook Myanmar. Just Google that. And like, see what they've done in other countries, and this like intentionally A/B testing different approaches to getting people to vote, and QAnon and all these different things. Like, oh, that's another thing, dude. I just watched this documentary on. This is a dark podcast. What should I talk about instead? I'll finish this point. I just watched this documentary. I think it's called Into the Rabbit Hole or something like that on Netflix, and it's all about how online forums have radicalized people in a crazy way. And it's interesting to even talk about these things. I think one of the reasons I stopped talking about these things because I assume that YouTube is filtering through using algorithms to filter through and listen to my audio to identify if I'm using words like COVID, QAnon, conspiracy. Like if I'm using these words, I think they automatically probably filter it out. And then I was trying to have a conversation with some friends on Saturday and just can't land on it. Like, and if you have an idea, tell me what you think. I really want to know what people think about this, which is, should we censor the internet? Because if you had asked me 10 months ago, 12 months ago, should we censor the internet? I would say absolutely not. That is the worst mistake we could make. And then you see how, all these alternative theories about the I don't even want to say pandemic because I don't want to get flagged on YouTube. That's my point. That's my whole point. Like, I feel like we've already sort of lost the free speech conversation on the internet in some regards. But then again, like, is that actually a bad thing? It must be a bad thing because I'm a person who's not touting these crazy conspiracies, but I'm afraid to talk about it, to even use these words publicly. Like, that's strange. That's not normal. But then when you see how many people are running around and how easily influenced they are and how non-critically minded they are. And this isn't just the people that ended up like doing things like storming the Capitol or, waving banners on a street corner supporting their favorite candidate and their favorite theories. You also see this with people on the other side of the aisle where they are, they're not willing to entertain the idea that we might not want to support Nike, even though they, are trying to be trying to give more of a megaphone to people who are talking about serious issues. I don't know. It's complicated. But what I really feel is like I'm sort of politically lost. Like, I'm definitely not conservative, at least socially. But then even socially, like they're the conservative policies of conservative fiscal policies don't even necessarily resonate with me because I feel as if there's a lot of people, and that group of people will grow in the next decades. There's a whole group of people who just have never had the choices to make good choices. I learned from something I was reading, or I don't know where it came from, but I'm in a position where it's easy to say that I made good choices, but also I was presented with a suite of choices that allowed me to make some of those choices. Whereas there's regions, cities, neighborhoods, there are entire masses of people of, all backgrounds that just don't have the opportunity to make choices that were otherwise presented to me as like, hey, here's a list. What would you like to choose? Is college the right choice for you, or should you go into the workforce? Like, that was a choice that I got to make. And I'm still saddling up with that debt, which is bonkers. But, that wasn't a choice for a lot of people. In fact, maybe most people probably just don't get that option. And so, I don't know. What am I talking about? Go back to the list, Aaron. What do you have on your list? I already talked about plastics. Plastics freaks me out. We're trying to phase out plastics. We're like saving pasta jars so we can start phasing out plastics. Apparently, you're not supposed to microwave in plastics, and people have told us that in the past. And I was like, whatever. That's for losers. Like, I'll microwave in whatever I want to microwave in. And then I learned, like, I actually heard some science, and it's like, you should totally not do that because it leaches all those chemicals that we don't know. Dude, apparently, we did this whole campaign to get rid of BPA in our water bottles, but all they did was supplant it with BPF and BP another letter, and those are just as bad when it comes to reproductive harm as BPA. So it's like, none of the plastics are safe, man. Just get off the plastics. But that sounds crazy. Everything's wrapped in plastic. not only is it like an environmental waste, but we're learning that it's actually really bad for reproductive health. So we're on the path to cleanse that out, especially because we want to start having kids here soon. So like we got to cleanse the body of all of that, the plastics that we've accumulated over the last 3 decades. So I'm on that mission. Send me some tips. Email me some tips. But yeah, we're going out west. I talked about it last podcast. I started researching retreats. Right before COVID happened, we had been putting together a business plan to start doing retreats, yoga retreats. And, I'd started creating the workshops and all these different things. We had lists of where we wanted to go, potential places that we wanted to see. And then COVID hit and it was bam. We were supposed to be the plan was, if you look on my website, ARENWayneYoga.com, the plan, and I think I took this page down, but the plan was to start doing retreats the summer of 21. And now we're here basically in the summer of 21 and everything got shut down. So this year, what we're going to do is our travel, we're going to go and try to hit up some retreat locations. I was looking at a bunch in Taos, New Mexico, which Taos is this dope little spot in New Mexico. It's like Sedona's little cousin that people don't know about as much. So we're going to go out there. I'm going to check out some retreats. I got a list of places to go check out. So, I don't know. We got to look at them and then talk money, talk timetables, and then start drafting up a plan from there of when we want to execute on those. But yeah, I want to do a yoga retreat, man. It seems like there's nothing. I was a camp counselor for a summer, and there's nothing like being in a beautiful place with people that you don't really know, and that you're doing activities and learning how to establish relationships quickly so that you can sort of share space in a a calm, lovely way. A lovely way. So I'm really looking forward to doing that, not only because it's going to be fun, but I think it would just be a nice challenge. I'm just looking for another challenge. I'm looking for something to build. I'm looking for something to kind of push me a little bit. I'm looking for something to have fun. Yeah. Another thing I'm thinking about is learning to code. I'm on Coursera right now, and I'm taking, Google has all these micro certifications, and I'm taking a micro certification on project management. And as I went through this, I'm 25% of the way through, of this module, it took me about a week to do that. It's actually it's fairly rigorous, online learning, these recorded lectures and quizzes and stuff. It's fairly rigorous. And what I realized is that I think most of my friends are project managers. I have a couple friends who are technically savvy, but a majority of my friends that work in business, they're just managing projects and people. And I've always said hey, so what do you do? And they really can't explain it to me because they're going from project to project, managing people and timelines and budgets and stuff. And having educated myself on what a project manager does, or a program manager, now I know. I thought that was I thought that was a job that was different, but now I know that most of my friends I think are project managers. I don't know, man. I'm thinking, one, it's just beneficial to all the stuff I do, understanding how to manage projects, because especially doing retreats and things like that, it's just good to have, even though I've planned and done retreats before, it's just good to have a little bit more structure to how you go about it. But I might make a pivot for 6, 7, 8 years as Katie and I start to build a family, because just full disclosure for you, if you're listening, 2 public school teachers that have student loan debt, you can't really have kids. And that's really sad. And it's really kind of messed up. And this is I'm wrapping the podcast in a minute or two, and I'm going to try to end it on a high note. But just to be honest, 2 public school teachers that have student loan debt cannot have kids. And I think that is a fundamental problem with our society. I mean, we could, my mom had 2 kids by the time she was 19, and she was working at a Kmart. You could do it, but not the way you're supposed to do it, So I'm thinking about making a career pivot for a short period of time, hopefully finding something within the still in the educational space, but managing some of these education platforms, I think would be managing projects on these education platforms. That's where I'm thinking. Let me know what you think. That's where my head's at. I think I might learn to code. I think that's also a valuable resource. I learned HTML back in college, so I'd have to refresh myself on some of that. But I don't know, tell me, what language should I learn in coding? I'll learn all of them because that's what I do. I will learn all of the codes. All right, guys, we did it. I put out another one, rebuilding that consistency. I think it's key. Just keep going. Movie has stopped automatically. The maximum recording time. Well, at least I sort of did an ending to that. Oh boy. Boom. There it is. If you're still watching, make sure you hit like and subscribe. It's the easiest way that you can contribute. It costs you nothing, and it helps me out a lot with the algorithm. So if you were into this, let me know. And see you on the next clip, guys. For full episodes, you can get them on Spotify and iTunes, as well as subscribe to the YouTube channel. I post them on Sundays and Wednesdays every week. All right, guys. Peace.
Yeah.